The conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran is widening, fueling fears for the global economy and disrupting travel across the Middle East. Retaliatory strikes from Iran have killed at least 20 people, including 6 U.S. service members, in attacks across the region and in Israel. Counter-strikes continued as President Donald Trump warned the confrontation could last weeks. Oil prices jumped from about $70 to nearly $80 per barrel before easing slightly, while shipping through the strategic Strait of Hormuz slowed. Analysts say prolonged instability could hit trade, raise fuel and food prices, and dampen investment flows. Although the United States is cushioned by domestic energy production, spillover effects could still undermine what had been a strengthening global growth. To unpack these, I am joined by Dr. Ayodeji Ebo, Managing Director, Chief Business Officer, PlutusNeo by Afrinvest. Thank you for joining me today, sir.
Good morning, and it's great to be here.
And I also have with me Olufemi Oladehin, Managing Director, ARGENTIL Capital Partners. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Now, the dreaded U.S.-Iran war is here finally. What's your reading of it? Let me begin with you, Dr. Ebo. Can you hear me?
It came as a surprise. Can you hear me now?
Yes, please go ahead, sir.
Yes, so I would say it came as a surprise over the weekend. Yes, while we know the tension around within that space. But when we also look at it based on the market, so it has its pros and it has its cons. So we can see that even looking at it from the Nigerian stock market perspective, we're already seeing significant interest in oil-related as the oil and the upstream sector. They have been enjoying that benefit. But we also want to look at it based on the economy. Nigeria economy, starting with Nigeria economy, you will also see that one of the saving grace is that subsidies have been eliminated. So it means that the impact will be directly into Nigeria's pockets, and that would impact on inflation. But look at what we used to have, that this impacts on the government spending, but now that's off the table, and it should even be a plus because it's going to be increased additional revenue. It's going to impact positively on the reserves. But when we look at the impact on inflation, because cost of energy, we just heard that Dangote Refinery has increased PMS price by 100 naira at the first instance, and that really has direct impact on transportation costs, which will also impact on the cost of goods and services. So it has its pros, it has its cons, and getting it prolonged, we'll begin to see that impact even on quoted companies, given the cost of energy and the cost of goods and services that would impact significantly on profitability.
Right. Mr. Oladehin, let's have your thoughts on this.
So what we've seen, obviously, is the continuation of very erratic behavior from the United States of America. And at a time when the global economy was just recovering more in terms long-term from the effects of COVID, all of the disruption that we've been dealing with. We have a US president who's very trigger happy. And I think the more important issues here are the fact that just when macroeconomic conditions were starting to clear up, the effects of the trade wars that he unilaterally unleashed on the global economy last year. We literally have a person in the White House who has very limited bandwidth for insults, very limited bandwidth for negotiations. And that in itself is jeopardizing the entire structure of the global economy. It is preposterous in the sense that Iran and the United States were in negotiations, and those negotiations were ongoing as at Friday. The fact that this president has gone and plunged the world into a completely meaningless, skirmish at this point in time has significant implications for different countries across the globe. So, I mean, transport hubs like Dubai, Etihad, Qatar are starting to see significant reductions in flights. They're starting to see people even questioning whether those regions are now safe in the long term. I think that what we need to be talking about right now is how the world responds to the United States of America, that has more or less become a lawless nation, a nation that doesn't respect international law, and acts, with impunity and expects the rest of the world to just keep quiet and accept it. Of course, when you look at the macro impacts of what has happened, higher crude oil prices will be positive for OPEC and non-OPEC producers, but of course negative for the rest of the world. The one thing that is obviously clear is that unless there's significant degradation of Iran's production capacity, we expect that these crude oil spikes will be temporary, bearing in mind that the world had an oversupply issue prior. But honestly, I mean, Perpetua, if I were to summarize this, I would basically describe it as a completely meaningless war that was completely unnecessary, and the world is less safe than it was as at Friday.
Interesting. You said something that I think I want to talk about, which is how the world would respond to it. So what do you think? How do you think the world should actually respond to this? Because some persons are beginning to ask questions. Where is the United Nations in all of this? We seem to have a very powerful man at the helm of affairs in a particular country who decides to, disregard everything that ever held the world together. So where do we go from here, really? Are you concerned about what's happening right now?
I mean, everyone has to be very concerned. From the reality is that the U.S. has always been a stabilizing hand when it came to the global, both from an economic point of view and from a socio-political point of view. Now we're dealing with this sort of behaviors that are dislocating and, unraveling 80 years of global stability, 80 years of protocols. The United Nations has been weakened dramatically by the United States. The reality here is the world has to respond. There's something that Professor Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala said in an interview recently, where she talked about that the truth is that the world has to recognize that the US is only 11% of the global economy, and probably even a smaller percentage of the global population. And at some point, the rest of the world has to come together and say, we can counterbalance the negative influence that has become the order of the day from the supposed strongest country in the world. And we have to do that for the long-term stability of the world. If that doesn't happen, then we're going to all be in trouble. So I hate to say this, but we now need to be looking to leadership from China, and that in itself is almost a travesty. But that's what the world needs right now. Somebody else has to come up with a counter narrative that has the same gravitas and the same economic power as the US, and to say, we can't keep acting like this. What happens if China decides tomorrow to go attack Taiwan? What is the world going to do? We're just going to look around and basically just accept it. These are very difficult times, and it will be interesting to see how we respond to it as a world.
Right. Dr. Ebo, let me come to you now. Let me get your reaction to that before we move on.
Yeah, so I totally agree with Mr. Oladehin regarding that there's a need for us to have a bit of order because we also understand that the number one man in the US can take decisions abruptly and most times distorts economic stability, economic equilibrium. So we see that even with his tweets, I recall that even at the Trump 1.0, then when a lot of is it Bloomberg or some statistics firm were trying to come up with the Trump index, given a lot of the volatility that we see. So it's also similar to what we're saying now. And when you see that trend creates significant volatility in the market, and it's making it difficult for even the global economy, the global market to be able to predict they were to predict within a reasonable period. So there's a need to see how we can also have alliances that can so provide a bit of more stable competition to what we're also getting from the US to send that strong signal. And secondly, there's also a need for caution from the number one man not to distort how the economy is moving, because even for business owners, stability, the ability to project, the ability to understand to a large extent what would happen within a reasonable period is key for productivity, is key for improvement. So once you lack this, no one, we all woke up Saturday morning or maybe late in the night and discover that things have changed. So if you had a position outlook, if you're in Eurobonds and you are playing in the developed markets, just on Friday, on Monday, your strategy needs to change and different scenarios needs to play out. How long will this war hold? What if it escalates? So these are some of the things that would impact on productivity going forward. And when you look at it, the inflation impact, I was looking at a documentary yesterday, is already affecting PMS fuel price, also even in the US, when you compare it on a month-to-month basis. So it also has its implication, and there's a need that there should be an order, or it should be called to order. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Mr. Oladehin, I mean, some would be wondering why Iran is throwing bombs all over the place. I mean, I was even asked this question yesterday by someone, and I think that so many persons who will want to understand. Maybe you can just let us understand why this is happening. I mean, it was definitely anticipated that, Iran could retaliate by targeting allies, the Gulf, and critical infrastructure of any nation it considers complicit. But let's get that from you.
Look, I mean, I think that Iran had very limited options. The United States is thousands of miles away from Iran, right? So if there was going to be a retaliation, obviously the United States would not have been a viable target for the Iranians. The next best target would obviously be key allies surrounding them, and or probably U.S. assets that were within proximity of where they are. I mean, look, the truth is that Iran is just an incapacitated child who is lashing out at a bully who has bullied it, and it's basically just the response that you would expect when you're dealing with the most formidable military force the world has ever seen. And look, the truth is that my expectation is that Iran's response will be measured and probably better long term. You would see some, symbolic attacks like you're seeing now, and basically targeting some strategic U.S. assets. But I think that if the Iranian leadership that is remaining today are able to stabilize the country and not, see it, degenerate into a civil war or a war of attrition, then you would expect that long term, Iran will be looking for a way to ensure that it sends a clear message to the rest of the world that you can't just come bully us and sail into the sunset, that there will be consequences. And so for me, what I expect is that you'll continue to see these backlashes and these lash outs from Iran, but I don't expect it to happen in a long-term coordinated fashion. They will be more measured in how they're going to respond globally.
All right, let's close with this. I mean, where do you see oil prices settling in the short to mid term, really? Let me begin with you, Doctor, very quickly so we can close.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that when you look at the direction already this morning, also when you look at Brent crude also approaching about $80. So if this is also prolonged, we'll see that increase. This projection is that it may touch around $100 level. But we also know because of the impact on the developed markets, they may also want to release a bit of their strategic reserves to reduce that impact in the immediate. But if this is prolonged, then we should see crude oil prices crossing over $100 per barrel.
All right, Mr. Oladehin, let me get your thoughts on that and we close.
I'm not as optimistic as Dr. Ebo on this, right? I think that the global oversupply is still a problem. Yes, we would have some technical, what we call in finance a technical rebound, which is driven by uncertainty and all of that. But if you look at the long-term direction for crude oil prices, I do not believe that this will significantly change that, except we see some significant degradation of Iran's production capacity. But if that doesn't happen and they're still able to open their taps and all of that, I expect that we'll still continue to trend lower. I expect we would end the year somewhere between $60 and $65 per barrel.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Ayodeji Ebo, Managing Director and Chief Business Officer, PlutusNeo by Afrinvest. Thank you for coming.